We're up to Daf Vav, and we'll begin with Tana Rabbanan, which you'll find at about line 10. Tana Rabbanan. The Gemara now quotes a brisa, which interprets a pasuk in Dvarim Perek Chav Gimel. I think we'll open up a chumash so that we'll see the pasuk in its original. So in Parshas Ki Teitzei, Perek Chav Gimel, and we'll start with pasuk Chav Beis. Ki sidar neder Hashem Elokecha lo sacher l'shalmo, ki darosh yidrushenu Hashem Elokecha meimach v'haya b'cha chet. That pasuk we analyzed in the previous daf. And then, if we fast forward to pasuk Chav Daled, motzos v'sechet tishmar v'asisa, kasher nadarta l'Hashem Elokecha nidava asher dibarta b'ficha. And this brisa that we're about to learn now is going to analyze, take apart this pasuk piece by piece. First, the pasuk starts Chav Daled motzos v'secha, zu mitzvos aseh. The Torah is telling you to fulfill your neder. And motzvos v'secha, you should be makayim. Then it says tishmar. Now the lashon of tishmar, as the Gemara establishes in Masechet Menachos on Daf Tzadi Tes, is always a lashon of a los aseh. And therefore, tishmar zo mitzvos los aseh. So if a person delays fulfillment of his neder, he is in violation of both an essay of motzvos v'secha tishmar, and tishmar is a los aseh, so he gets both an essay and a los aseh. Now, all this is a pella because we derived the prohibition against delaying fulfillment from the previous pasuk, which is lo siacher l'shalma. Then it says v'asisa. V'asisa means against your will, and that's an ashara lebezdin sheya'asucha. Ya'asucha means they will compel you to fulfill your neder. And what that means is, if need be, the bezdin will use force, maybe even lashes, to see to it that you fulfill your neder. Then the pasuk goes on. It says kasher nadarta ze neder. Neder is what we said, harei olai karma. L'Hashem Elokecha. L'Hashem Elokecha already means a karvan chova, an obligation, not that you took it upon yourself voluntarily. Elu chatos v'hashamos. So if a person violates a sin, various dinim, he brings either a chatos or a nocham. And then there are other occasions where he's obligated to bring an olah, which is called olas re'iyah, on the regel, or shlamim, which is the karma chagiga, once again an obligatory karma that he brings on the regel. So L'Hashem Elokecha tells you that you're obligated, and that gives us the list of these four categories. Then the pasuk says nidava, and we know what nidava is. And nidava is harei olai. I'm sorry. Nidava is harei zu. Kirmashma'o, as in general, what it means in every code. Then the Torah says asher dibarta elu kodshei berek habayis, which of course we discussed at great length. Berek habayis divides up into different kinds of ekdeshos and erchim or dami olai. And then the last word in the pasuk is beficha. Beficha, here's a surprise, zut staka, that you're obligated to fulfill your commitment and your neder to give money to the aniyim. Now, how does that flow from the word beficha? So Rashi explains that the word beficha is miyutar. It's just a redundant word. And the last category that's not derived from this pasuk of a fulfillment of one's neder is staka. So it's sort of like by virtue of default, the word beficha means staka. However, Tosis quotes a pasuk in Yeshayahu and Navi, and there it says Yatzami Pi Staka. So the word Pi is written in the same verse with Staka. The Ran has a discussion here about why this brisa omits leket, shikha, peah, maser. Omar Mar, the brisa says motzav sasechus umitzvah say lamali. Why do I need a mitzvah say from the pasuk chavdalid motzav sasecha miubasa shama vevesa shama nafka? We already derived this mitzvah say to fulfill your neder from the pasuk in Dvarim Yud Beis, Ubasa Shama Vavesa Shama. That's a mitzvah say. The Gemara is going to ask the same question over and over again. Tishmar, the Brisa derives from Tishmar Zu mitzvah Losa Sel Lamali. We already derived that mean Losa Acher L'Chalmo Nafka. Furthermore, V'Yasisa Ashar LeBezdin She'asucha. We derive from this word Vasisa that Bezdin will compel you to fulfill your neder lamali. Why do I need Vasisa? And then I can derive me Yakriv Osa. At the very beginning of Sefer Vayikra, the Torah says, "Im olak arbanom bakar zachar tamim yakrivenu el pesach olmod Yakriv Osa." And Nafka, we derive from the words Yakriv Oso, that Bezdin is commanded to force a person to bring his carbon. The Sanya we learned in the Brisa, Yakriv Oso, Melamed. This teaches us, because the beginning of the pasuk says Yakrivenu, so what's Yakriv Oso, a repetition? Yakofin also, that Bezdin will force him to be Mekayim his neder. Yochalam, I think, Bal Korcho. At the end of the day, he is completely compelled without any ratzon whatsoever. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says lirtona, because right after the word Yaakov also it says lirtona. So how do we reconcile? On the one hand, Yaakov also means we compel it. On the other hand, lirtona means he has to want to bring the carbon. How do we reconcile this? Oketzad, Kofanosad Shioma Rotzani, one of the most famous Gemaras in Chas. It appears all over the place, that we force him until finally he says Rotzani. So the Rambam has a whole question here. What do you mean Achiyoma Rotzani? He's not Rotzani. Who are you fooling? He, it's like your money or your life. If he doesn't give in to the Bezdin and bring his carbon, he's going to die. So he's only bringing it as out of compulsion because his life is worth something to him. So the Rambam has a whole shita that really he wants to fulfill the will of God, and his true inner desire is to fulfill the mitzvah and the obligation of a karman. But sometimes we have to beat him up and inflict pain on his body in order that his true, genuine will come to the fore when he says rotzani. So the Gemara answers that for some reason, we need both sets of drashos. Ad, for one case, the Omar, when he declares Hare Alai Lahavi Karbon, V'lo Africh, and he has not yet designated a specific Elsie the cow for that carbon. V'chada, we need another pasuk, the Afrish, where he already designated the animal, below Akri, but he hasn't yet been Makri. Utrichan, I need both. The Ashminan, if you would tell me Amar V'lo Afrish, where he made a verbal declaration, but he hasn't yet followed up with a designation, and now you're telling me that in such a case, since he took a neder, he's going to violate an essay, a losa said, kofanoso bezdin, if he refuses and delays designating a carbon, mishum delo kaimel dibura, since he hasn't fulfilled his dibur, his neder, his verbal commitment, that's why we're going to impose upon him the essay, the losa said, the kfiyah, avol afrish below akriv. But I might think if he already was mafresh the carbon, he designated and consecrated it, and for sure he's going to bring it sooner or later. We don't have to force him. He doesn't have to be in violation of the Torah law. Wherever the animal is, it's in the reshus of Begaza, means of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of Hegdesh, and therefore he'll be considered as if he was Makayim, at least his verbal commitment. As if you're worried about his bringing the carbon, you have no concern because he already has a carbon that he was mafresh. Therefore, I need the Torah to tell me that even after he was mafresh the carbon, he designated, he fulfilled his verbal obligation to designate a carbon. Nevertheless, he's going to violate all these prohibitions and be subject to compulsory law because he hasn't yet brought the carbon that he was mafresh. But and if you're going to tell me in a case where he already designated the carbon, but he hasn't brought the carbon, or in the case of tzedakah, he designated certain funds as a contribution, he hasn't yet delivered it to the aniyim, to kamashi le'legabe. Since he's holding on to the carbon or holding on to the kesef tzedakah, the leket chikopeya, and he's denying gavah or the aniyim what's rightfully theirs because they have rights to this money that you designated or this carbon that you were mafresh. Therefore, since you're denying gavah, the recipient, you violate these lavim, and we have to compel you. Avol Omar. But if he only said arei lie and he took a verbal commitment, velo afresh, but he hasn't yet designated a carbon, so there's no behemoth that belongs to gavah, and there's no gavah claim to demand cough up the behemoth. So therefore, all we have is a verbal commitment. Ema, I might think dibura lo klumhu. I would think that a dibur is, we say that, talk is cheap. All right, he made a commitment. But who says that we have to compel him and he has to violate lavim if he delays fulfilling his verbal commitment? Tzricha, if I need a pasuk to tell me that even in a case where all we have is a dibur, and the gavah has no claim to any specific animal, and the aniyim have no claim to any specific funds that were designated, in such a case, the Torah has to tell me that nevertheless, we will impose on him all these isurim, slap him with the essay, the losas, and compel him to fulfill his dibur. The Gemara now asks, Umi motzes amrit di omar velo afrish? Is it really feasible to interpret these psukim as referring to a case where he only took a verbal commitment on nidava ksiva? The Torah says nidava. Nidava is explicit in the pasuk. Utnana, we have a Mishnah in Masechet Kinim. Ezu neder homer harei olai olam. Ezu nidava omer harei zu olam. So the word nidava means he's already specified a particular animal that was designated as his carbon ola. Uma bein neder nidava. What's the nafkamina? Asks the Mishnah, between a case where he said harei olai, which is a neder, or a case where he said harei zu, which is a nidava. Neder. In a case of an eder, if the animal that he designates ultimately is lost, stolen, he's responsible. Mace, if it dies, nignav, chaya b'achriyusa. He took upon himself a chovas gavra, harei alai, which animal he will ultimately bring to the mizbeach to fulfill that commitment. That's irrelevant. That's secondary. He's got to fulfill his commitment. Nidav, on the other hand, he designated harei zu ola, mesa o nignava, eno chai b'achriyusa. His entire verbal commitment revolves and is concentrated, limited to this particular animal. If this animal dies, if it was stolen, he's not obligated to replace it because there was no chovas kavra. It was just harei zu. Omar Rava. So Rava now comes to answer, how could it be that we're talking about a verbal commitment without a hafrasha, and the Torah describes it as an adama, which is harei zu? That means there already was hafrasha. Kigon the Omar harei alai ola almanas she'eni chayav b'achriyusa. He decides to have a crossbreed of sort and play with the rules. He said arei alai, which is a neder. And in the case of arei alai, we've already established in the Mishnah Kinim that he's responsible achrayus, and if this is lost or stolen or dies, he's got to replace it. But he made a condition. Arei alai ola al menashe eni chayav b'achriyuso. My condition is that I don't want to accept any responsibility. I will set aside one animal, and if that animal is brought as a carbon, fine. If it cannot be brought as a carbon, I'm not responsible. So in this case, the Torah was marbe, a ribui, that he violates all these isurim if he doesn't fulfill his neder and he's not mafresh a carbon. When it comes to karbanos, is halach of gimel regalim, and he violates delaying gimel regalim because the essence of a carbon is to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. And during the sholosh regalim, he goes to the Beis Hamikdash, and he's got 3 opportunities on 3 consecutive regalim to fulfill his obligation of bringing a carbon to the Mikdash. It makes sense that the Torah would say that he violates this al tiacher after 3 regalim. But in the case of tzedakah is not something that you bring to the Beis Hamikdash. My timer, why should you violate al tiacher immediately? There are aniyim, unfortunately, all over the place, all over the globe. I mean, I can tell you how many aniyim came to me this morning, just this morning. I don't mean in my house, I mean in shul. So therefore, he doesn't have to go to Yerushalayim in order to fulfill his obligation, his commitment to deliver and transfer his funds to the aniyim. He can do so sitting in his house or in his community. He doesn't have to schlep all the way to Yerushalayim. And therefore, we're not going to wait until he gets to the regel to Yerushalayim in order to slap him with Bal Tiacher. He violates Bal Tiacher immediately. He has an opportunity immediately and urgently to deliver the funds to the aniyim. And here, my friends, we have a kasha the Rashba. Rashba says that this Gemara of Rava, with regard to tzedakah, throws a monkey wrench on the whole enterprise of Bal Tiach and the halach of Gimel Regol. Because Rav is saying that everything depends upon what we call yecholos. Yecholos means your ability. You have the ability to give tzedakah immediately. So the Rashba asks, what about people who live in Yerushalayim? They're in the environs of the Beis Hamikdash. They don't have to schlep from Dan and Beersheba in order to bring their carbon. They should be over Bal Tiacher immediately because they have the yecholos. And furthermore, he says, I don't understand. Forget about those who live in Yerushalayim. I live in Dan, I live in Beersheba. But I have to come to the regel, on the regel Taliyah Yerushalayim. Immediately, when I hit Yerushalayim on the first regel, when I came from Dan or Beersheba, I'm obligated to fulfill my neder. So why shouldn't I violate Bal Tiacher immediately? And these questions really bothered the minds of the Rishonim. The Ritva says that this is not a klal, that chayav litein miyad, that he always has to give it immediately and fulfill his neder urgently because he has the yecholah to do so. In the case of aniyim, that's something totally different. There, the aniyim are never starving. And if you have the ability to give the monies that you designated or fulfill your verbal commitment to give them and save them and bring them out of the state of avon, of famine and hunger, then you're obligated to do so immediately. The Gemara asks Pshita. Certainly, I see no relationship between tzedakah and gimel regalim, tzedakah and karbonos. Why would gimel regalim be a havamina and cross anyone's mind that there's no Bal Tiacher unless he passes 3 regalim al-datim? I would have thought kavan to be yonei the karbonos ksiva. When we look at the pasuk, that we just read before, Baltiacher, the context of the pasuk mentions staka, beficha zut staka. And therefore I would think that maybe the Torah is equating staka with karbanos. And therefore, the overlay sholosh regalim ki karbanos. He would not violate Baltiacher. In other words, the Torah is setting up an absolute uniform time period for Baltiacher and the violation of the law. And anything that's written in that parsha is included in Baltiacher as defined. So the Havamina here before Rav's Chiddush was it's just like karbanos. The Torah sets up Baltiacher as Gimel Regalim, then Staka, which is written in the same context, likewise, we derive Gimel Regalim. Kamash Malan. Now Rava comes with his Chiddush. Hasam, over there in the case of Karbanos, who did Talin and Rachman Regalim, since he comes to Yerushalayim for the Regel, and he's obligated the mitzvah of Aliyah Regel on these three occasions of the three Regalim, and then he has the opportunity to bring his Karban. Therefore, he violates Baltiacher if three occasions pass by and he doesn't fulfill his neder aval hach. But here in the case of tzedakah, the Torah doesn't make it depend upon three regalim, because he has plenty of haniyim and opportunities to fulfill the mitzvah. And as we said before in the name of the Ritva, the haniyim are desperate to receive those funds. So with regard to tzedakah, everything depends upon his ability to give the tzedakah, deliver it to the aniyim, and support them. And whenever he has that opportunity, he has to fulfill and stand up to the plate. And if he doesn't, he violates Baltiach. Now, let's keep in mind that the Torah gave us a lav of Baltiacher, which depends upon three regalim that pass by. On the other hand, we derive from Pasuk of Dala that we read earlier, from the words Motzos Fasecha Zu Mitzvaseh, and there the Torah doesn't mention anything about three regalim. Amar Rava says there are two different dinim here. One din is Kevan Sha'aval of Regel Echad over the essay. The essay is going to be violated immediately after his first opportunity, Regel number one. However, the Losas said he's not going to violate Baltiacher until three regalim. It means that we take this parsha of Baltiacher and we really chop it up into two dimensions. One dimension is the mitzvah haseh. We're not going to be very patient, and we're not going to be long-winded with regard to the aseh. You reach the Mikdash at the first regel, and that's your opportunity to bring the karban and fulfill your neder. And there's a mitzvah aseh, and the Torah says, "Ubasa shama," you came there, vayvesa shama, you should vayvesam shama, you should bring your karban. But with regard to lo tiacher, the lav, that's a more severe violation, and we delay and suspend the violation of the lav until three regalim pass by. Comes out according to Rava, as we said before, there are two different dinim. There's one din as far as the essay, and another din as far as the los. Meisvei, the Gemara now has a brisa. Actually, it's a Mishnah, which contradicts Rava. This Mishnah is in Masechet Temura. Now, what's the Mishnah talking about? A little bit of an introduction of background. We have a behemach shlomim. It means a person was mafresh, he designated an animal as a korban shlomim. The animal was a female that was pregnant. Now, either she became pregnant after he designated it as a korban shlomim, or the other way around. She was pregnant already at the time of designation. It makes no difference. Now the issue is, what's the status of the vlad, the little calf that's born to this cow? The Chachamim say that the vlad has the same status as its mother, and it has to be brought on the mizbeach as a korban shlomim. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees, and he says, no, we're not going to bring the vlad as a korban. He was magdish the mother and not the vlad. What do we do with the vlad? Apparently, even Rabbi Eliezer, who denies that we'll be makriv the vlad, nevertheless he admits that the Vlad does have a quasi status of Kachim, but we can't bring it on the Mizbeach. So here we have a halacha called Konsim Osa L'Kipa Ad Shiyomas. Kippah is kind of a prison. We incarcerate the Vlad, and eventually it dies. It dies on its own. We can't kill the Vlad because it does have some element of Kedusha to it. Kippah means a makom sagur, a closed area, and choshishin shema yishes ha'emi l'chochtat ad shivoldu vlodos harbe. There's a chash here that if we allow the delay of bringing the mother because we saw a Vlad, because a person might be tempted to wait until this cow will deliver more and more calves. Now, if we leave the cow around, there's a violation which is called Gizav Avoda. So therefore, we want to encourage him to bring the behemah as early as he can. Hey, Rabbi Yeshuv Rapafius ad Vlad Shlomim sheyikrav Shlomim. And now we have a testimony that we accept l'halach l'shita the Chachamim against Rabbi Eliezer, and the Vlad has the same identical status as its mother. It's a carbon Shlomim. It has to be brought immediately. And now he tells the story. Amar Apafios, Ani made, I can testify, we had a parah that was designated as a carbon shlom v'achal nua b'Pesach, and we ate it during Pesach. V'achal v'lada shlom b'chag. The Gemara assumes that the word chag now means chag HaSukkos, and the Vlad, we only ate as a carbon shlomim 6 months later, waiting, as it were, from Chag HaPesach to Chag HaSukkos. Now, wait a second. You just told me, Rova, that when I'm obligated to bring a carbon, I violate an essay immediately at the first regel. So the Gemara says, Bishlev Pesach lo akravua. I could justify the fact that they didn't bring this Vlad on Pesach. Eimer de mechusas manav. Perhaps the Vlad was born on Pesach, and the halacha requires that we wait until its 8th day until we can be makriv. By that time, Pesach has passed. And that's based on a pasuk in Vayikra Chav Beis, Shar o Keves o Eis ki v'yivaled v'haya shivas yomim tachas imo umiyom hashmini v'hola yirotza l'karban ishe Hashem. And that means that you have to wait until it's 8 days old. Now, you're going to only violate the essay when a complete regel passes. So even if, let's say, the Vlad was born on Erev Pesach, in which case it reached its 8th day on the last day of Pesach, the 7th day of Pesach, nevertheless, is no Bal Tiacher, because Bal Tiacher means if he's Ma'acher in a complete regel. El Vlada, but I don't understand about the Vlad. How can he wait till Sukkot? Batzeres, Hechi Mashile. All right, he didn't bring the Vlad. It was too young and immature at the time of Pesach because it was born right before Pesach. But why didn't he bring the Vlad on Shavuos, just 50 days later? Vika Avri Ale B'Essay. According to the sheet of Rava, we don't have to wait 3 Regalim to violate the essay. The essay of Vavesem Shama is violated on the first regel. How could they wait till Chag HaSukkos? And the Gemara gives 2 answers. We're going to start with the answer of Amar Avzvid Mishmei de Rava.